I think anytime I can feel like I have all the tools that I need to make decisions for myself, it brings me so much ease and it really helps, yeah, like lower my anxiety. And so this feels like another one of those examples of like, oh, if I want to avoid pregnancy, I already have everything I need to do that.
I feel the earth underneath me. I feel the earth underneath me. I feel the earth.
Welcome to the Infinite Earth Body Podcast, where we talk about bodies, healing, pleasure, and share stories of embodiment on Earth. I'm your host, Maya, and I'd like to start by taking a few moments to ground, root into our connection to the Earth, call in the support of our most benevolent ancestors and guides, and set the intention for the shared space of connection to be dedicated to the liberation of all beings. Today is Menstrual Magic Moon Day. We're going to be featuring stories about menstrual cycles, fertility, contraception, pregnancy, and birth. Today, I'm so excited to be welcoming our guest, Silvia. Silvia Canelón, she, her, is a queer Latina living in Philadelphia who works as a data scientist and spends a lot of her time thinking and creating around relational and power dynamics, tech justice, and reproductive justice. She has 8 years of on and off experience charting her cycles and uses her fertility awareness training to support her local community and cultivating body literacy. Silvia, welcome to the Infinite Earth Body Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Maya. I'm happy to be here.
So I wanted to start out by asking you, what was your experience when you first started your period?
Well, I was 11 at the time, and I had been living in the US, but I had moved back with my family to Venezuela, which is where I'm from. And so you can imagine this is a period of transition. There's a lot changing. There's a culture shock for me after spending 6 years in the US. And some girls in my class had already gotten their periods. So this is like something that people were talking about. And socially, it was considered like this point of pride, because it symbolized maturity and like entering adulthood. And I wanted that rite of passage too. So what I remember is that one day my mom gave me this little zipper pouch with some panty lighters inside of it. And she was just like, you'll know when you need it. And that was the end of the conversation. But even that felt like a rite of passage, like this simple acknowledgement from her, this like act of being given panty liners was enough to call down the moon. And it made it feel more real for me somehow. And so I was waiting with anticipation. I was like, when is it going to come? When am I going to be next? And so I was carrying this little zipper pouch everywhere. And when it finally did come, I knew because I had found a little brown streak in my underwear. And I remember expecting like bright red and being confused about why it wasn't bright red. But I was like, well, that's got to be it though. That's got to be my period because I've never seen this before. And I remember I sniffed it out of curiosity. And to this day, when I visit that memory, some part of my brain still remembers the sensory experience, even though I can't specifically remember the scent, which I think is so fascinating. It's like when I reach for the full memory, it's like the scent piece of it is just out of my grasp. And yeah, like I remember at school, I was telling my friends, I was like, oh, me vino la regla. And so like I was part of this cool club now. And then after that point, my mom had told me to like start marking a calendar with the date that I get my period every month. And she graduated me to thick pads, so no more panty liners. And at one point, I remember asking her about tampons because I kind of knew they were a thing because they were next to the pads at the store. But she got upset and she told me that was for grown women and not for girls like me. And so And so that was a moment where I added menstruation to the list of things that I couldn't talk to my mom about.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. It was a cool kids club and there wasn't, it was like a rite of passage and that you were excited to get your period because that's so different than a
Hmm.
lot of stories I've heard around like shame and embarrassment, which was really my
Mm.
experience of just feeling like so embarrassed and I didn't want to tell anybody. So I'm really glad that you got to have that experience, that it was like a positive thing that you were looking forward to. So that's really great.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was nice. I definitely feel grateful for that aspect of it too. I think it it did feel, I wouldn't say it felt shameful, but it felt stigmatized, a taboo, I guess. A taboo at home, like because I couldn't talk to my mom about it. But it was nice to have that space among my friends where we could talk about it and talk about how we're growing up and all this.
I love that. So, how has your experience with your menstrual cycle evolved over the years or throughout different phases of your life?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's it's not evolved too much. Like I had a pretty, I guess I would consider for me like a pretty boring like pretty boring kind of run-of-the-mill period for a really long time. I don't recall having really debilitating pain or experiencing any other kind of like big um symptoms. I do remember there was like something in like school culture, I guess, around PMS. Like I remember that being something that was in my consciousness when I was a young teen. But I don't remember where it came from. Probably like a magazine. But I do remember having moments where I was like, "Oh, am I PMSing?" And then I would think back to like after I got my period, I would kind of think back to the week before and be like, "Oh, well, I guess I was like really annoyed that so and so said this. And I guess I was really like frustrated that this boy wasn't paying attention to me. Like what felt like bigger feelings than my average feelings. And so I would attribute that to PMS, I guess. But as I got older, yeah, I think that pretty much was the way that they were. And then of course when I started taking hormonal birth control, then I wasn't menstruating, like I wasn't cycling. Um, and then coming off of birth control, there was a little bit of time to find my cycle again. But yeah, I think the most notable thing I would say has changed over time is that now I feel a little bit more like malaise and more cramping when my period comes. Like I feel more that need to take it easy and to slow down and to rest more. And so I think part of that could be related to just my cycle and body changing over time, but I think another aspect could be that I am just more aware of my body and more tuned in to the sensations. And so I could definitely see how I could have been ignoring some things before, especially when I was a lot younger, that now I'm a little bit more conscious of.
Mhm. So, just to share with our listeners, Sylvia and I connected through the cycle tracking community. For those who don't know, cycle tracking, or more specifically, the symptothermal method, or what's also called fertility awareness method, is a practice of tracking your cycle through taking your temperature every morning and checking cervical fluids as a practice of either contraception or for some people who are trying to get pregnant or just for general self-care. So, spreading knowledge about the symptothermal method is one of my biggest passions and part of my life purpose. So, you all will be hearing a lot more about this in coming episodes for Menstrual Magic Mondays. So, our passion, our shared passion around this is how Sylvia and I first became friends and then creative collaborators. So, Sylvia, will you share more about what was your journey getting into cycle tracking or fertility awareness method?
Yeah, I love that you're exploring these topics with folks. It's such a trippy time for me to be thinking about this because it feels a little time travel-y because the first time I started thinking about fertility awareness was actually when Trump first came to office 8 years ago. And at the time I was 26 and I was in a relationship where I was exposing myself to sperm and I was relying on the pill to avoid pregnancy. And I was in graduate school at the time, and my health insurance had been covering my contraception thanks to the Affordable Care Act. And I was really afraid that this new administration was going to have these like different priorities, that was going to cause me to lose coverage. And so I started looking into long-term contraception because I had been using the pill and so I wanted to explore like long-acting reversible contraception, which is what I learned at the time. And uterine implants, which are a form of like long-acting reversible contraception, they seem pretty intimidating because it like the surgical aspect of it felt like too much for me at the time. And so I was leaning a little bit more towards the Implanon, which is an arm implant. But I didn't like the fact that for either of these options, I would have to rely on some kind of medical intervention, right, to take it out when I was ready. And in my mind, I was like, what if there's nobody that's going to be able to take it out? Because who knows what's going to happen in the future? And that really made me uncomfortable. And um, and so I had like all these anxieties, like around contraception, but around everything else that was happening at the time. And I really was kind of going down this like prepper rabbit hole where I was thinking ahead to a world in which I wouldn't have access to all sorts of different conveniences, including some form of contraception. And so eventually, I was searching online and I came across this blog post and it happened to be talking about the Daisy fertility tracker, and which is it's a device that some folks like to use to try to track their cycles, but it's kind of a predictive tool. It's not something that I knew much about at the time, and so, but presumably it was going to help like track natural hormones, and I was like, well, what do you mean? And so I started reading reviews for this device. And then I saw somebody in the comments mention this book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility, written by Tony Weschler. And like once I saw some charts, I was immediately drawn in. I was like, whoa, what is this information? Um, this is so cool. So of course I bought the book and I consumed it and it blew my mind. I was like, what do you mean I can observe all these things about my body? It was just so cool to suddenly be exposed to this new information. And so I used the book, I used Taking Charge of Your Fertility to teach myself how to chart. And then I sought support from a fertility awareness educator named Ashley Hartman Annis because I wanted to make sure that I was doing it right. Like I had learned on my own, but I wanted to just make sure that I was interpreting things the right way and charting the right way. Because it's, if you want to rely on this for birth control, you want to make sure that you're you're following the steps that you need to be following and interpreting your observations correctly. And I had picked Ashley out of all the fertility awareness educators that I came across online because she is explicitly inclusive of the queer community in her practice, and I hadn't seen that anywhere else. So that made it an easy choice for me.
Yeah, we love Ashley. She's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love I feel like so many of us share the story of just like that excitement and our minds being blown when we're first exposed to this. So it's just exciting
Hmm.
hearing about your story with that and just like that fire that kind of turns on and the passion.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. It was such a cool experience.
mhm. And so how did that lead to your journey to becoming going into your fertility awareness educator path?
Yeah, so I had read that book, Taking Charge of Fertility, and I had learned one-on-one with Ashley, and I was still so curious, like you're talking about this fire that gets lit up. I just had so much curiosity to learn more. And around that same time, I had found the Fertility Friday podcast, which is hosted by Lisa Hendrickson Jack. And Lisa's a fertility awareness educator, and she's trained in Justice. And on the podcast, I remember there was always a big emphasis on the Justice method being like the gold standard as far as fertility awareness-based methods. And so naturally, I wanted to learn the Justice method because, it's this claim to be the gold standard. And at the time, I mostly just wanted to learn to satisfy my curiosity. I knew that, of course, like Ashley, I knew that folks were like seeking training as a way to be able to work with clients and have that be like generating part-time income for them. And that wasn't super appealing to me. That felt kind of intimidating. And I already kind of had this idea in my mind of a different like 9 to 5 that wasn't related to fertility awareness, but I still wanted to like know more about cycle charting and then how to, kind of how to have more context for cycles and what's going on that I wasn't, that I wasn't finding in like resources that were readily available to me. So I ended up looking up Justice, and I attended an info session for their Holistic Reproduction Health Practitioner or HRHP program. And at the info session, I learned that Justice was very soon going to triple the cost of tuition. When I had shown up to this info session, it was 5,000 Canadian dollars, so about 3,500 US dollars. And they were going to triple it to 15,000 Canadian dollars and 10,500 US dollars. And that would include 2 years of training. And I actually checked today what the tuition cost was, and tuition for that program right now has increased to 18,000 Canadian dollars. So that's roughly 12,500 US dollars. But needless to say, when I left that info session, I was feeling a little bit of pressure to enroll right away because that's a huge tuition increase. And I decided to go for it, even though I was in the last year of my graduate program and I already had a lot on my plate. I was really determined to make it work. So the Justice program was really comprehensive and provided a lot of opportunities for me to learn things about the human condition and the human body as relating to sexuality and reproduction. And I also learned about white feminism along the way, which is just fun. But jokes aside, I was at a point in my life that was where I was ripe to receive all of this new information, and the way that I chose to engage with the materials really helped me learn a lot about myself and my body and the way that I move through the world. So I was like connecting fertility awareness to larger reproductive justice movements and starting to envision how I wanted to share this information with others. Whereas before that wasn't necessarily a priority, but now it was feeling like much more the direction I wanted to go with what I was learning. So, fast forward, I was nearing the end of my 2 years of paid tuition with Justice, and I was still working full time, and I still had a lot left in the program. There's an entire portion of the program that is called an internship, and that's where students would do client work, supervised client work. They would find clients and then do case review and follow them over months, and then review these cases with their mentors, their Justice mentors. And so I had still all of this ahead of me, like this internship portion, and I just knew I wasn't going to be able to finish it without extending my time and paying more in tuition. And I definitely wasn't going to be able to do that, especially not at the new rate. So I ended up opting to finish everything but the internship aspect of the program. And so I left Justice with what they called a body literacy advocate certification. And at the time, Justice offered this BLA option to recognize all the work that was completed, but it's not something that's offered anymore. And without the internship experience, I wouldn't feel comfortable working with clients one-on-one for complex cases, but my desires for this kind of work evolved over time anyway, and I am naturally drawn to introducing fertility awareness in community settings. So it became and remains clear for me that however this work looks in my life, I want to situate fertility awareness as a tool of resistance in a system that constantly threatens our bodily autonomy.
Yeah, it feels, I mean, it's always felt so, so important, but like you're talking about, this administration kind of makes it feel that much more important. And yeah, when you were talking about going down the prepper rabbit hole, like this is really kind of like apocalypse proof contraception. Like if you have your thermometer, but maybe if we don't have access to batteries, at least if you can track your bodily fluids. And
Right.
that's really, if it came down to it, that it's kind of all you really need. So it's so empowering and important. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think anytime I can feel like I have all the tools that I need to make decisions for myself, it brings me so much ease and it really helps, yeah, like lower my anxiety. And so this feels like another one of those examples of like, oh, if I want to avoid pregnancy, I already have everything I need to do that. So yeah, I agree with you. It's absolutely empowering.
And also just so resonant about not of you not wanting to rely on like the medical system, and like if access to insurance changed or there was changes just in the medical system, just being like, yeah, this is in our own hands. So yeah, it's so
Yes,
important.
totally.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I love, one of the things I love about like the symptothermal method and fertility awareness in general is that it is reversible. Like you just use the information however it makes sense to you in the moment. Like I was using it and have been using it to avoid pregnancy, but as I'm sure listeners will hear from other folks that you interview, from you, it's also really helpful to conceive, like to use this information to conceive and to plan a pregnancy. Um, and that's just, there's just something so organic about that, right? That you would just choose how you use the information to suit you. And these other options, which have definitely have their place, and I'm glad that they're available. But it does, those things do feel a little bit more precarious when um, yeah, when we live in systems that don't support them.
hmm Yeah. So I have another question for you. I just was wondering if you feel like sharing what's your favorite thing about your cycles, or what's your favorite thing about tracking your cycles?
It's a good question. I don't think I've thought about that. Um, oh, I mean, I think I gotta say I love. Oh, well, I have maybe two favorite things. One thing that I love about it is being able to track the temperature and see when the temperature shifted and then be able to use some guidelines to kind of be like, okay, I don't have to worry anymore because I have no risk. There's no risk of me becoming pregnant. And there's something very freeing in that. And it's unlike anything I had experienced before I learned about fertility awareness, because even with the pill, which was the other method of contraception I had used, I never felt that confident in it. Like because you ideally, right, as perfect use, you're supposed to take it at the same time every day. And it wasn't that common for that to be the case for me. And even with perfect use, and this is true for all methods, but there is still a risk of pregnancy. And anyway, but I think being in that post temperature rise, like luteal phase, yeah, it's great. It's it's like it's an amazing piece of information to have about yourself. The other part that I really love about it is being able to use that information, like information about your fertile window, to be able to make more informed decisions about what you might want to do. You know, if you're engaging with a partner and there's the risk of being exposed to sperm, having that extra information could help you decide, oh, maybe I want to double up on contraception, maybe I want to triple up on contraception, or maybe I want to explore other ways of being sexually intimate that don't involve exposure to sperm, you know, but that I love that I can have that information and that I can use it along with my partner to be able to make decisions that will help us both feel, will ultimately help me feel really comfortable with what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, for listeners who want to learn more about the symptothermal method or fertility awareness, I'll put some links in the show notes that people can learn more and just some resources. So, um, yeah, and where can people find you online if they want to connect with you or learn more about your work? I know you do your like data science work or just whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah, I have a personal website. It's silviacanelon.com. And that's mostly a home for my data related work. I do have a placeholder Instagram account for fertility awareness related things. And that is the handle cycle curious.
Great. All right, Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my
Is there,
pleasure.
is there any other last like closing thoughts you feel like sharing?
I guess the other closing thought this came to me as I was wrapping up my answer to your question about your favorite parts of the cycle, because I think there's just so many things that I enjoy. But one of the other really practical things that have really come to appreciate is before I was tracking and was, you know, in relationships where I was being exposed to sperm, there would have been moments where I would have gotten nervous about unintended exposure to sperm, like a condom ripping or whatever, you know? And so there were a few cases where I opted for emergency contraception. I was so grateful to have that available to me. Um, and one of the things that, you know, you learn when you're learning about fertility awareness and emergency contraception is that it's, you know, if I had been in that period of time, like I was saying, like in the luteal phase, after the temperature shift, and I really wasn't at risk for getting pregnant, if that's the part of my cycle where I would have been exposed to sperm unintentionally, I wouldn't need to take emergency contraception, right? Like I wouldn't have needed to feel that anxiety and I wouldn't have needed to like flood my system with that hormone dose. Um, and so that's another aspect that I love is like a very practical, another like practical way to use that information. Yeah, to help me make more informed decisions about my body. But yeah, thanks
Mhm.
for asking because that did pop up in my mind and it was nice to have the opportunity to share it.
I know that's a huge one. I just think about that, like how many people have taken emergency contraception in their luteal phase when there's zero chance of pregnancy and like just having
Hmm.
that stress and the side effects of the hormones totally. So I just want to like shout that from the rooftops. Like
Yeah.
emergency contraception, also, it doesn't work if like depending on where you take it, it might not work, or you might not need it
Hmm.
depending on where you take it. So it's just so
Totally.
important. And like nobody tells you that,
No.
when nobody tells you that when you're trying to get the emergency contraception or, just basic sex
Hmm.
ed of all the things we could have
Hmm.
learned. Yeah, that we
Oh, I
didn't.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, well, we could go on for days about all the things that we think should be part of basic sex ed. So we'll be back to share more in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks so
Um,
much for having me on. This was so fun.
yeah, thanks for being on. And I'd like to close this container. and seal the medicine we just shared and give thanks to our most benevolent ancestors and guides. All right, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks, Sylvia.
Of course.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or on YouTube, and feel free to leave any questions, other topics you'd like to hear about in a future episode, or anything else you'd like to share in the comments. Please leave a review for the podcast, and if you'd like to go deeper in the conversation in our inner circle, you can join our Infinite Earth Body Collective Patreon. You can see the link in the show notes, and thank you again for tuning in, and see you in the next episode.